So after looking at testing writing and speaking, which are productive skills, in this video, we will turn our attention to one of the receptive skills, which is reading and how we should test reading. So if I ask you which one is harder to test, writing and speaking or reading, you might say it is obviously writing and speaking because they are very subjective, while reading is more objective when it comes to selecting test methods and scoring methods. But the thing is, unlike speaking and writing, we can't really observe the way students read or listen. We can only see their reading comprehension through how many correct answers they get in a test. So even though some people may consider testing reading or listening as being a lot, more simple compared to testing writing and speaking, it's not really that simple for that matter because we can't really observe them. We can't see their production in actuality. So similarly to testing speaking, before setting up the tasks and selecting reading texts for students or candidates, we need to first of all specify what the students or the candidates should be able to do, and this includes various elements such as operations, types of text, addresses, topics, and the criteria levels of performance. So we are going to look at each one of these in more detail. Now, in speaking tests, operations are what speakers do with the language, like describing or explaining something, right? If you remember. Now, these actions are very visible. They are easy to observe. We can see them, right? In reading tests, operations are somewhat similar, but they happen inside the reader's mind. We can't see them, we can't hear them, right? We can't directly observe them. But we can design tasks to check if students are actually doing them. So when students read a text, their understanding comes from applying different levels of reading skills, or what the book calls different levels of analysis. So we are going to look at different levels of analysis here. Firstly, we have the macro skills of reading. Now, these are the big picture skills that relate to course objectives or everyday reading needs, such as scanning for specific information, skimming to get an overall understanding of the text, identifying main ideas, examples, or supporting information, or following the structure or stages of an argument. And then we have the micro skills. These are more detailed or underlying skills that support comprehension. They include things like, figuring out what a pronoun refers to. For example, what does the word it refer to in the paragraph? Guessing the meaning of an unfamiliar words using the context in the passage. Okay, or recognizing how a text is organized, and that includes transitions, sequencing, how ideas are connected to help students comprehend the meaning of a passage or a whole text. Now, at the same time, students may also rely on grammatical and lexical knowledge too to help them understand or comprehend a text, right? They may try to understand verb tenses, or knowing verb tenses can help them understand when things happen, okay? Or they may, understand a word that can help them understand a sentence. Now, these are skills that we need to think about when we choose a text for students to do. So when we talk about the operations in reading, we are referring to different kinds of mental work, right? Mental processes that students need to do to understand a text, right? From something that is big, like scanning, to something that is very simple, like relying on grammatical knowledge or lexical knowledge. So identifying these clearly can help us create better tests that match the learners' levels and goals. Okay, so when we talk about the types of text in reading tests, we mean the different kinds of written materials that students might read. So this could include things like textbooks, novels, newspapers, magazine, letters, timetables, poems, advertisements, or reports, and more. But the important thing is designers or teachers need to identify clearly the types of text, the one that is relevant to your students, to their students in class, and or the purpose of the test. So for example, if it is used for a proficiency test or a placement test, then the types of text might be chosen accordingly too. And it is also important to include a range of text types in the test, because different texts can challenge readers in different ways and can also create a fresh start again for students too. They may struggle with one reading text, but they may exceed in another, right? Okay, because they all have different backgrounds. They may have come across different topics, may have had different experiences with different types of situations. So having different text types can really benefit them a lot. And speaking of text types, it is important to consider the authenticity of the text too. So you may want to choose texts that stimulate or simulate a real life context, or texts that are relevant to everyday situations. This is because if students have no experience or have no knowledge of the topics at all, then that already creates a barrier, right? A block in their comprehension, let alone trying to find the main ideas of a text. Since they don't even know what the text is about, they have no idea what that is. And that brings us to the addresses and topics. For the addresses, and just like testing speaking, we need to consider who will read the text that we choose. That will help us select the right type of text too. So are your students the one reading the texts? Then you may want to choose something that match their level, their interests, and their purpose for reading, like a text from a textbook, an email, or a short story. Will the text be read by candidates from all levels with different background, like in a proficiency test or a placement test, for example? Then you may want to choose texts that suit a broader audience, such as a newspaper article or a general interest blog post, for example, right? Choose something that everybody you think can benefit from. And then we have the choice of topics. So once you know the type of text, who will be reading it, then you need to choose a suitable topic for the readers. So choose topics that are authentic, relatable, relevant, and generally interesting to your own students or a broader audience, depending on the purpose of your test. And topics may include things like health, social media, environment, travel, or education, right? These topics are very well known. They are general, they are not too specific, too technical, and we can assume that everybody has some sort of knowledge, some sort of experience with these types of topics. Of course, when we give a test, we need to decide how we score it or what it means to pass. So, unlike speaking and writing, the ways we test or score reading tests or listening tests are not the same, because they are not subjective, right? They are objective based type of test. So holistic or analytic scoring methods do not work. But before we get to that, I would like to do a quick review of two types of testing: norm reference testing and criterion reference testing. I hope you still remember those. But the norm reference testing compares students to each other. So it's all about ranking who did better than whom. So to make this a lot more simple for you, let us take a look at the example. So let us take our entrance exam, IFL entrance exam, for example. Let's just say that the school normally selects 600 students per year, and there are 2,000 candidates. Now this means that the top 600 candidates will, with the most scores, will be selected, and for the candidates with from 601 and lower will not be selected. So that is how they compare the scores the top students get with the scores that the lower achieving students get. Right? So if they only select 600, they will only choose the highest scores in the top 600 or the top 30, 40, 50%, depending on how they determine it. Right? So if you, it doesn't matter if the number 601 got 80, right? If the student got, if the student number 601 got 80 and the student 600 got 82, then they will not select the students within 601. The score doesn't matter. They rank you, right? They rank you and they consider where you where the top selected number of students will get to pass, and they compare your scores with the others. It doesn't matter how many you get. If you get 90 and the other get 91, then you are bad. You are worse than that person. Something like that. I hope it's clear here. I hope I don't over explain. But let us look at the criterion reference testing. So this one does not compare, unlike a norm reference. It does not compare students to each other. Instead, they decide whether students pass or fail if they can perform the skills required and meet the standard scores. So let us look at this example. So if you want to graduate from IFL, then you must take all the required exams, right? Things like semester exams, exit exams, another proficiency test, and then you have to complete the teaching practicum too. Now, if you manage to complete all of these requirements and manage to get 50 points or higher, then you pass. As simple as that. They don't compare you with other students, which means if all 1,000 students get 50%, they all pass. You know what I mean? They do not rank you or put you among the passing group and failing group, okay? If you can match it, if you can get all these requirements, if you can get 50 points overall, then you pass. Easy as that, right? Okay, but if this were to be norm reference, it's going to be a lot harder, because let's just say the school only select 100 students who will get to graduate. Then if you are not good enough to rank higher than the top 100, then you're going to fail, even though you get more than 50, for example. Yeah, I hope it's clear here, because it can be quite tricky too. Yeah, something like that. So now that you know what norm reference and criterion reference testing are, then let us look. Let us get back to the scoring reading test, right? Now, what you need to know about this is that it can be quite tricky, because from our experience, as a student, normally the reading tests, they do not have a lot of scores, right? Okay, they are just it's just part of a test. It's never been an actual test on its own, unless you are taking an IELTS test, right? Where reading is an actual test on its own. It's not a complementary test. But mostly when we take reading tests, they are just complementary, and therefore they do not, have a lot of scores attached to them, which means the less point distribution to them, the less reliable they are. The scores do not represent the student's real reading ability, because it's not enough of a sample for that. And therefore, criterion reference scoring approach is a better option here, because we do not want to pitch students against other people. You know what I mean? If let's just say that your maximum scores for your reading test is 20, and you said that if any students can get 10, they pass. Then if you can get 10, then you pass. You know what I mean? So you're not really judging them based on, okay, how well they read by comparing their scores with other students, right? If you compare them, then it's not going to work, because the top 3 students will likely get 20, and if your students get 15, then you would consider them as failing, because they're not in the top scorers. You know what I mean? Yeah, but no, if they can get somewhere between 10 and higher, they pass. All of them are pass, and we can consider them as competent readers, something like that. So criterion is the way to go, and this is something that we have practiced pretty much for whoever knows how long, right? Okay, we've done this all the time. We never use norm reference for reading and listening. So now we can start setting the tasks and select our texts. Again, text selection depends on your own judgment, your own experience, type of students that you have or candidates, interests, etc., etc. But there are some, other things that we should all bear in mind. Okay. Number one is to select text that represents students' level of difficulty. We don't want to choose something that is too high or too low. Okay, maybe a +1 is a better option if you feel like the students are above their current level, then add a +1, but make sure that it's not too hard. Make sure that your texts are not too long, not too short either, the right amount, the right length, right? And as always, at least two or three passages are appropriate for a reading test because they can, number one, create a fresh start for student. Number two, it ensures reliability. And one more thing you need to avoid is that you do not use questions that can be answered without information from a text. This is because your questions sometimes are too obvious, and with just common sense alone, with just our background knowledge alone, we don't even need to read the text to answer that because it's literally always true. We avoid that. And we choose texts that are relevant, relatable, authentic. Again, I've repeated this like multiple times. We should never use texts that students have already read or we think students might have already read. So these are some of the things that you need to bear in mind as you are preparing your tasks and select your text. So once you've done that, then we can start writing items. Okay, by items here we means questions. Okay, questions for testing reading. So writing items or question types to measure students' reading comprehension and ability need to be chosen properly. You must have seen a lot of these question types of or techniques, if you will, in a reading test. They're pretty common, right? Things like MCQs, true, false, even though it has a higher chance of guessing since there's only one 50-50 chance of getting a false answer or incorrect answer. We have things like unique answer question, short answer questions, guided short answer questions, summary completion. You must have seen these a lot, right? They are literally the backbone of reading tests. Okay, but there are also other items or techniques for specific purposes. I'm sure you have done this as well. They appear a lot in TOEFL tests rather than IELTS. So here they come in the form of MCQs, but they ask for specific purposes. For example, ask students to make inferences, ask students to find the main ideas, ask students to find the synonyms of the words, identify line where something is said in the passage. These are more present in TOEFL tests rather than IELTS. Now, there are a few steps that we need to follow when writing items for testing reading. So first, we need to have a clear operation in mind, right? We need to know exactly what we want students to do. Do we want them to scan for specific information? Do we want them to identify main ideas or examples or making inferences? So identifying what we want students to do in a reading test helps you select items or questions, which brings us to step number 2. We can start selecting items and questions, and we should take notes, right? Take notes of where the answers are found, because if you choose that question, if you choose that item, you must know exactly where the answer is. So take some notes of where the answers are throughout the text, and we must select appropriate techniques. Okay, so once you know the information you want the test student, all right, how you want to test it, then select the appropriate techniques, right? Do you want to test it in the form of MCQ, true, false, short answer, summary? It's up to you. Not up to you, I mean, have a clear goal and purpose, right? Yes. The paragraphs should always have some numbers and lines. This is especially for when you have inference questions, where students have to make inferences or identifying main ideas from a specific paragraph. Then having paragraph numbers and lines can help students with that. And we need to draft it, and if possible, have someone to review and make some revisions as you go. There are also some things that some practical advice on item writing as well. First of all, we need to make sure that items or questions are in the order in which the answers can be found in the text. Now, this is extremely important. If you take a standardized test, okay, the answers are found in the order that they appear in the text. For example, if the answer of the first item of the first question is in the first line, then it should be appropriate for students to find the second item, the second answer to the second item after that. Anywhere you want, just make sure that it's after the first one, okay? And once they have found the second one, then the third one should be after the second one, not all over the place. We don't want it to be all over the place. Do not think of it as, I want to confuse my students, I don't want to make it too obvious, but that's not, a standardized way of doing that, okay? The answers, the questions should be arranged in the order where the answers can be found in the text. In its order, right, from start to finish. Answers to the items have to be found from the text. I just said it, right? Okay, we cannot allow students to just answer the questions without reading the text just because they know enough about it, right? So avoid that. Do not focus too much on grammar mistakes or spellings or punctuations. Remember, we are not testing their, productive skills. We are testing their receptive, their ability to read.